Now, I'll be the first person to admit I'm not really into sports all that much, but every single one of these books was so amazing and featured such interesting people that it made me love whatever sport they were playing, kind of by proxy. If you're into sports, you have to read something on this list, but even if you're not, you'll find something to love in every single one of these books. Simone Biles is easily the greatest gymnast ever to live. Like, the stuff she does is absolutely incredible. She has so much power in such a tiny little body. But what a lot of people don't know about Simone Biles is all of the things that she had to go through to get to that point. Did you know that she was actually in the foster system? She and her siblings were taken away from their mom and were placed in foster care, and later their grandparents ended up adopting them out of foster care. So Simone actually calls her grandparents mom and dad. These are just some of the trials that Simone Biles had to go through that you will learn about in this book. And trust me, if you thought she was awesome before, you have no idea how incredible she actually is. You've got to read this book. If you're looking for a lighter and fluffier gymnastics book, you definitely have to go for I Got This by Laurie Hernandez. Now, don't get me wrong, she has a lot that she also has to go through in terms of training, and it really gives you a cool inside view into professional sports and what it's like to be a professional gymnast. But the cool thing about this book is Laurie Hernandez herself. She is such a positive person and such like a force for good that it really makes you feel good reading this book and learning more about her and her outlook on life. The Boys in the Boat is one of those books that I constantly book talk because it's amazing. It gets set during the Great Depression, and it's all about rowing. And to be honest, I knew nothing about rowing before I read this book, but it is such a fascinating sport, and especially this team that's featured in this. The main person in this book, he lived a life that was like something in the beginning of a Disney fairy tale, complete with an evil stepmother and everything. Basically, his family just keeps abandoning him over and over and over again until finally they just leave him in this schoolhouse and say, basically, see ya, you're on your own. So he has to find a way to take care of himself, and he's like only in middle school at this point. So he's had a really rough life, but he joins this rowing team from the University of Washington. And they make a team that's basically people who know nothing about rowing, but they all come from these backgrounds where they really are trying to prove themselves and trying to prove that they are worth something. And so this is a really cool book. It's about rowing, which is not something I ever thought that I would be interested in. But this book makes it so interesting, and you really learn the intricacies of the sport. But honestly, it's really all about the characters and this group of people who end up achieving amazing things, even though nothing was ever expected from them. And they had all of the hurdles you can possibly think of to jump through. Life in Motion is all about Misty Copeland, who is the prima ballerina, and she also has an amazingly interesting backstory. She grew up basically bouncing from house to house. There were days where her family didn't have any food. They were living out of a motel. And so she had a really disrupted childhood, and she actually didn't start dance until she was in middle school. And she started with a dance team, of all things, and didn't get into ballet until she was almost a teenager, which is crazy to think about because most people, they start ballet at age 3 or 4. But there was something about her. She just had this natural talent. And she was lucky enough to find a lot of people who supported her and her dream to dance for the American Ballet. This is a must read for any dancer because it really goes into how to become an elite dancer, but it's also a great book about overcoming obstacles. And lastly, War in the Ring is a really interesting story. I actually took an entire college class just on this one boxing match. This is a boxing match between Joe Louis. You may recognize his name from Joe Louis Arena, who is a boxer from Detroit during the Great Depression. During the 1930s, the U.S. and Germany were definitely starting to feel some tension. You could feel like that World War II was brewing. And anything that pitted a German athlete against an American athlete became this huge deal. Nothing was more huge than this one fight between Joe Louis from the U.S. and Max Schmeling from Germany. This is a story all about Joe Louis and how he got into boxing and all of the hurdles that he had to go through, particularly being discriminated against in the 1930s and dealing with discrimination and racism inside and outside of the ring. But it's also a story about how the entire US for one moment put aside all of their differences to support someone and how that support led to triumph. By the way, there are plenty more sports books out there, but if you are looking for a book about any sport, I guarantee I can find you a good one.